Welcome to Fortify Your Future, a podcast for professionals who currently have executive oversight of or aspirations of leading the safety and security function for their organization. I'm your host, Ken Carrasco, and joining me on the podcast today is Bryan Banta. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Hey, I appreciate you coming back on. For those that haven't actually listened to the previous podcast, and I'm actually going to, I'll make sure that there's a link to the previous podcast if they haven't already listened to it. But for those that haven't, so they're not familiar with your background, can you reintroduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So sounds good. So my name is Bryan Banta. I'm currently the Director of Talent Development and Learning at YPO. But that being said, regardless of my current sort of formal position, I have had the privilege over the course of a very amazing career so far to be involved in very diverse roles. I kind of started my career out working at Cisco right out of college. Graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo with a degree in business and management information systems, and was lucky enough to join Cisco as a starving college kid in 2000. So my roots are sort of starting in that environment with a great company, working in IT, information technology, more on the software side. And then over the course of my career, that sort of led to opportunities to work in federal law enforcement. So I did spend some time in the Department of Justice as a special agent with the FBI, very short, early in my career, but an amazing opportunity. Ended up going back to Cisco, and from there had the opportunity to work in both executive protection with Global Protective Services, along with UCAN, and then moved into human resources. From there, I've also worked in other areas. I had an opportunity to work in the health sector, working for a hospital out here in the Idaho area. I also have opened multiple businesses, so as a small business entrepreneur in the areas of wellness and martial arts, which is great. And then the other thing I'd also mention for folks, just in terms of my background, I don't often refer to it, but I think it's important because our personal and professional lives are not mutually exclusive. But a big part of my life has been being a full-time caregiver for my wife, who has multiple sclerosis, and so I just have a very soft spot for folks out there who take care of others in that capacity, or who are dealing with major situations like MS. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Great. Well, first off, thank you for agreeing to come back and really do this series of episodes that we are going to concentrate on. And this is directly tied to the book, the guide that you've written, Leadership Uncomplicated, which I see right over your shoulder there
Yep.
on your desk behind you. And I have my copy as well. And I thought
Great.
after reading this book and this guide, and then having the episode that we did, it was so important, I think, that we really drill down into specifics, and we'll get into that with regards to each of the episodes. We'll break them down into these key areas, beginning with strategic alignment, and that'll be the focus for this particular episode. But as you know, Bryan, I always like to start off each episode with leading with value. And I want to make sure that the audience understands what that means and what you've offered in the previous episode that we did, and that is an opportunity for one-on-one consulting or coaching at no cost. It's complimentary to have a session. And I offer the same for those folks that want to have a direct one-on-one conversation about the content that we discuss here. We're willing to do that. And so we're really targeting those individuals that, as I said in the lead up of the episode, and each and every episode, it's really about those who are in leadership, senior leadership, executive positions with the responsibility of the safety and security function. And that might mean chief human resource officers, that might mean head of legal, It might be director of facilities, a chief operating officer that ultimately the safety and security function rolls up into. So it could be a various avenues in which that occurs, and those are the folks that we're willing and offering to speak to. It's folks that traditionally, the directors of facilities, the directors of safety and security, those people where they are perhaps new leaders and are looking for guidance as they continue to move forward, or they're seasoned leaders and they're dealing with new challenges and they're trying to figure out how to deal with those new challenges. So those are the types of individuals that we're looking to assist and help, and so we're putting that out there on the front end for those of you listening in today that fit those categories. You're aspiring to be a leader of the safety and security function. So those are the types of individuals that we're offering assistance to and help at no cost. Reach out to us. I will include links to Bryan's LinkedIn so you can connect with him directly. I will certainly put a link to his book that's available on Amazon, which I encourage everyone to purchase. It's incredible information. It's actionable and it's relevant to today's challenges. So let's get right into it, Bryan.
Sure.
The first key area of Leadership Uncomplicated is about strategic alignment. So so take us through strategic alignment as you've broken it down and why it's so important. And I'll make one more comment. I recently completed a podcast with Ron Ricci, who
Mm,
is a former Cisco exec that I know that you know as well.
yeah.
And one of the big key things that Ron mentioned in that episode, and I encourage people when that comes out to take a look at that. It's premiering August 8th. That idea of alignment, he really emphasized as well. So take us through why strategic alignment is so important right out of the gate.
Yeah, it's really great, and thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time also to explore this topic and for us to really just do a deep dive for folks. Before I kind of dive in specifically strategic alignment, I'd like to just spend a couple minutes giving some context around why strategic alignment, why it's kind of first, what sort of is underneath that from a human perspective, because I think alignment as a focus area of effective leadership is key, but there's some things and some elements beneath that that I just want to spend a moment talking about. And one of the things that you mentioned in the opening there around whether you're a new leader, whether you want to become a new leader, or you are an existing leader at any level, one of the things that struck me, and it was one of the primary reasons why I ended up writing Leadership Uncomplicated, was I'll kind of go back to some of my sort of martial arts, in teaching classes in martial arts. It's very interesting that sometimes you kind of come in and you're think about the very first basic techniques of anything you're doing. And in the martial arts, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, here's the beginner technique. What you find out later in that journey is that the beginning technique is actually the very advanced and profound technique as well. It's just approached differently. So I find that the fundamentals of effective leadership and Leadership Uncomplicated is a way to, regardless of where you're sitting, to revisit fundamental principles of leadership. And even if you're experienced in the world of people leadership, it's a way to come back and reflect. And yes, it all starts with leadership alignment. So something that is key to kind of think about, and I do outline this in the book quite a bit, that there are, there's these 5 focus areas, starting with strategic alignment. But part about being a good leader starts with a lot of the traits and the values that you bring to the table. And I spend some time just highlighting what some of those are. And one of the 4 key sort of traits of what makes a great leader is, in my opinion, strategic thinking, which obviously is going to align very closely with strategic alignment. And strategic thinking is really, think of it as um, a key element that includes many different skills. And I'll just highlight a couple, but it's your ability as a leader to really be able to plan and envision. So visionary planning, having a vision and mission. And we're going to talk about a little bit more of this in what strategic alignment means. as well as prioritization. And I think that's key. And I'm glad to hear that Ron's speaking about a lot of that too, because I often run into, when you think about alignment, strategy, planning, this whole dilemma, which a lot of leaders face, which is everything's a priority. Well, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority, and then you oversaturate your delivery teams, right? So your ability to be a visionary, your ability to really effectively prioritize, and then also being very data driven. So use data, let data be your ally. So the trait of strategic thinking and how you really like work on that, and then these skills that you can help to support that, I think are very important, and they all feed into, this whole concept, this focus area of strategic alignment. And I do think everything you do as a leader and everything you do to lead a team starts with alignment. So let's talk just a little bit about that. Before I jump in, any questions on that before we kind of move into?
No, that gives us good context and focus. So great.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, so what is strategic alignment? Why is it important? One of the things that I find, a lot of organizations, especially your AAA personalities and the go-getters and people like to get stuff done, they can always really gravitate to work. Let's get some work done. And one of the challenges, there's always work to be done. Part of the key responsibility of a leader, though, is really understanding, well, what is the value-driven work to be done, though, right? There's 1,000 things you can do or 1,000 levers you can pull, but maybe only 3 really add value. So sifting through the noise is part of what strategic alignment initially is about, to make sure that you are driving clarity, and clarity in an agreement that what you and your team are going to accomplish, and how that's aligned with the larger company organization, is what this is all about. So it's very, very important for teams to know what they're working on, that they're working on the right things, before they start to think about and worry about, are we doing those things right? So like I said, people can get caught up in the work, oh, we're doing this the right way, but maybe that isn't even the right thing to be working on. The fun term I use often with my teams is avoiding the ready, fire, aim mentality, right? So really spending the time to plan. And then once you have clarity and alignment in place, then everyone can really move forward with more intention and purpose, and then build upon that, sort of your performance, professional goals, as well as your individual development goals, and really drive the energy to accomplish the mission. So we're going to talk a little bit right now about like what are the elements of the strategic alignment, and kind of diving into that. But again, think of it as a high level. If I used this example one time, it's kind of interesting. Imagine you're on, for sports fans out there, imagine you're playing football, and you drop an individual with the ball in the middle of the football field, but it's foggy, and you say, run, go score a touchdown. But it's foggy. They can't see 5 feet in front of their face. They might start running really quickly, but who knows where they're going? They may be going in the complete opposite direction or out of bounds. Strategic alignment is helping you lift the fog to drive the courage to then go, there's my goal. I know what I need to do. I've got the ball, and now I get to run. Because if you don't do that, if you're running through fog, it's a little bit like, well, I don't know. I don't want to hit a wall. So there's a hesitation. So you're not really tapping into the full potential of your team. So again, all of this starts with clarity and alignment, and what's the strategy, and how do we move forward together as a team. So maybe we'll just spend a second talking about a little bit about, okay, so we want to make sure through strategic alignment that we're doing the right work, right? Value-driven work. Again, because through the noise, there's lots to do. You want to make sure that you're applying your energy, your efforts, to the mission that matters. So what helps inform doing the right work, right? That's really your mission and your vision. Think of the mission, though, as the mission is sort of what you're going to do, who you serve, and how you're going to operate, right? And then the vision, is really the longer term aspirational sort of mission that you have, right? What is that long term goal? And then the mission to support that. And then what you can do is develop strategies ultimately that are going to, support achieving that mission and that vision. And this is where you start to think about, okay, with particular strategies in place, what are those SMART objectives? So SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. And creating those objectives and measures to accomplish that. So you can start to see, and again, there's the one thing I like about, and it was intentional when I wrote the book. I want it to be a visual guide, right? So we're talking a lot here, but to be able to look at these things with and simplify them, because you're already starting to see as we talk through this, the cascading effect of, you have a vision, you have mission, and you have your strategies and then objectives to support all that. So that's a key thing to really work through. And I would include, or I would encourage all leaders to actually include your teams in the development of your vision and your mission as you work through that to help drive that clarity. So talking about mission and vision, so what informs the mission and vision, right? So that's kind of the next question. Okay, well, we want to do these things. They're important. This is what they are. Well, this is where the alignment with your immediate stakeholders comes into play. Of course, the alignment with your direct supervisor. Now, in many cases, this might be an enterprise leader. So if you're a senior leader or a first-time manager, you're most likely going to report to either an enterprise leader, or think of it as a leader of leaders, right? And then also, you want input from your actual team, so the boots on the ground, if you will, the folks that are in the trenches, that are there every day. So all three of these things are very important for you to consider when you're thinking about what informs the creation of your mission and your vision and the strategies that you will employ. And this is the work that is often overlooked, right? It's often overlooked because, again, you come in, you got a list of deliverables that you got to do, and nobody ever kind of comes back and goes, well, wait a second, we've been doing these things, but are these really the right things? And given this day and age, with the advent of AI growing and like our world is transforming, we need more leaders to step in and go, maybe we need to rethink, are we strategically aligned with where our organization is going, and how do we best support that, and ask these larger questions. And then once you have you've worked with your stakeholders, you've worked with your direct supervisor or leader of leaders, and um, you're getting to understand from your team's perspective. So all these different perspectives come together. You look at what the mission and vision need to be. This is when you now can begin to craft your goals and objectives. So when you think about that, you always want to start with, okay, well, before you ask individuals to align what their performance goals are going to be or their individual development goals are going to be, you have to be clear on where is your team or department going, right? Where is your organization going? That has to be very clear. This is on the shoulders of leaders, not your managers that support you. This is your job, and working with your stakeholders and your supervisor to come up with this is now you will ultimately come up with your objectives, but you do want to include everyone in that process. So starting with what is our department going to do, vision, and then you can come up with each of the teams within your department can come up with their objectives, and then that will naturally translate or cascade down towards individuals being able to come up with the performance goals and objectives to support everything, and then their individual development goals. And a lot of this is outlined in the book in greater detail. But it's really hard if you don't have things this cascade from the top down and the bottom up. It's hard to ask people to develop, hey, where would you like to go and why would you like to go there, if you're not giving them any direction at all, right? Think about understanding the situation before you come up with the mission. It's very important. And any time that you're working as a leader, to inspire human beings, these are the things that are important, not just, hey, get this work done. People will get, some people can, okay, just go in and get work done. It's very important, if you truly want to move the needle, to inspire folks through this work as a leader, because it matters not just what you do, but why you're doing it and how you're doing it, which is absolutely key. And strategic alignment is really the first step. And a lot of this, that the larger amount of effort, this is the 80% of this work, falls on all elements of leaders, managers, leaders, enterprise leaders, all of this. It's their job, it's their responsibility. So if you're uncomfortable with being strategic and coming up with and inspiring human beings around, this is the work that we do, why we do it, and how we'd like to approach it, and they're involved, it can be difficult and frustrating sometimes to be in a leadership role, because it isn't just, here's the list of things, let's go get these done. So this whole focus on strategic alignment actually helps you as a leader focus on the right things yourself initially. Make sure that this clarity exists. I would also encourage all leaders, honestly sort of a secret weapon here, and it may feel uncomfortable at first. Um, honestly, is transparency, right? Trust always comes through full disclosure. Trust comes through, transparency and vulnerability as a leader. People don't expect leaders to be perfect and to know everything. It is your responsibility to work through this alignment, but lean into, hey, we're working through this, but that it's important to come up with this and to align and drive that clarity and purpose before we ever ask anybody to start doing the work. Because then what you end up is situations where people are working really hard, right? They're running, but they're running in place. They're not really going anywhere, and that's definitely not what you want to be doing, especially nowadays. There's just so much energy out there, and you don't want people running in place. So that's one thing that I would encourage leaders to do is actually openness, transparency, and a little bit of vulnerability is really key. To making sure that you're on the right track initially. And again, another thing, I'll talk a little bit about some of the other tools we can leverage to do this, but just remember it's super important to always make sure that you're doing the right things before you focus on are you doing those things right. So I'll pause for a second. Is this
Yeah.
resonating? Any questions or thoughts that come to mind as we introduce
Y-
this a bit more?
Yeah. Today, and I've talked about this with many people, and we've had these discussions before. But one thing that I'd like to get your thoughts on, and you've touched on it in terms of talking about, the vision and alignment, and you talk about the business. But and I think that we've gone through and seen relative to sort of the different generations approach this differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you and I were coming up, and we go back to Cisco, there was a framework that we were taught there, the VSEM model, right?
Yeah.
Vision, strategy,
Strategy,
execution, and
execution.
metrics.
Yep.
Yeah, and I still use that today, right?
Yeah.
That's something that's a framework that I latched on to, and now it's something that I utilize, I teach, and I sort of am a person who advocates for that model. But I think the key learning that I had, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is that it's not necessarily the particular model that you use, but it's imperative that you use a model.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get your thoughts on, you know, your sense on where you finally have sort of put together this particular model in this manner, but more importantly, how you see it um, being accepted or adopted by sort of this next generation of leaders. Because one of the things that's important to me is really advocating for, when you talk about building these goals, and utilizing the SMART framework, right, is sort of fundamental. But when you talk about identifying these particular goals, I think it's so important that personal development of your team is the priority, only because today more than ever, this younger generation puts so much emphasis on their story. And
Mm-hmm.
Ron talked about the fact that there's really not, the corporate ladder has died, and we're creating our own chapters of this story, this career story. So what that means is that personal development, career development is critical in making sure that your team continues to be moving ahead, incentivized, um, participating in the larger picture of the team and the organization. So I want to get your thoughts around sort of the nuances
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how people should approach this, leaders, how they can really, I think, explain this in a manner in which the individual contributors and perhaps those folks that are the up and comers can digest this in a way that they're going to really understand that this is going to be beneficial for them in the long run, that it's going to help them. But I think from my personal input, it's like you have to be participatory beyond being a coach and just guiding them to resources. You have to take an active role in the development, in their personal development, right? To get them to that next step, to help them to that next career move. And oftentimes it's not something that I think people generally feel, they don't generally feel like, okay, that's a great idea, because they're afraid, well, as we develop our people, they move on, right? They go on to bigger and
Right,
better
right.
things, right? And so the thought process for me is that we need to think about this at sort of, the bigger picture here, right? We want to continue to provide the motivation and the incentive for folks. And I think the only way you do that today is really caring about your team. And you demonstrate that by really caring about their future.
Yeah, this is fantastic, and yeah, hats off. Ron was talking about that as well. So one of the things, again, I'll unpack a little bit of this, but so thank you for that, and I completely agree. One of the things that often came up with a lot of, again, my martial arts students, I used to have this saying for years in that space where, you know, not all students are going to become teachers, but all teachers are students. And I started to apply that years ago in the corporate world, right? Where not all managers are going to always lead, but all leaders still need to do a little bit of element of management. And I think what's happened over the years, the old saying, I forget, I'll paraphrase the quote, most organizations are overmanaged and underled. And I think what you're really talking to is getting back to the heart of what leadership is. Management is about sort of managing tasks and deliverables. Leadership is about leading people, inspiring people, motivating people. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I have this question that I like to ask leaders when it helps me kind of gauge what's going on in terms of incentivizing them to even become a leader in the first place. And it's quite interesting to hear responses. But it's, if no one ever thanked you, praised you, or promoted you for leading, would you still want the responsibility of helping others grow? And notice how there is that emphasis on helping others grow. So I'll share this with you in the audience because I think it's important. I've even gone so far, I kid you not, in many of my staff meetings, especially as I come on board with maybe some new teams, and literally will tell them, look, I don't care about the work. And I get that look like, what do you mean you don't care about the work? It's like, I don't care. You care about the work. I care about you. I'm here to support you. I've always kind of thought of leadership isn't like I'm in charge, like a direct authority. That exists, but it's more I'm a role on the larger team myself as a leader. And my job is to support the growth and development of others. And so I completely agree. And I think that's where you should see a shift between an emphasis on management of things to actually leading people, which starts with, again, the strategic alignment piece, going back to that, helps with understanding the landscape in which you're operating, but it very quickly can become the opportunity to go, what does it matter to you? Right? How do I help you achieve what you want along this journey? Because it is about the individual. And I think that's such an exciting thing that you brought up. And it's such a great point to emphasize for existing leaders to revisit or new leaders to really think about is that's the key to tap into the growth, the development. Because if all you're doing is um, existing in a world that's very defined, and you're trying to go from point A to point B, that's management along that continuum, right? But if you are, and many of us are today, because of the world we live in and the business that we're involved in, or the transformation we're going on in our own lives, even taking on a role, you're transitioning from that existing what is today to whatever future state. To go from today, from current to a future, it requires leadership to rally, change management, all of those things come into play. So how you tap into the growth and development of people, and really, and you'll find is people get very inspired because it immediately shifts your focus from, hey, let's get these things done, no, go do it, to what matters to you. By the way, quick side note, it's one of the reasons why I love lean methodology and agile as an approach, because instead of pushing work to the team, you allow them to pull work into their world, right? So they themselves can take ownership, but they know that the work they're pulling in has been vetted. Again, going back to sort of that demand management concept of, are we working on the right things first before we do those things right? That's been decided. Here are our priorities, and now you can align as an individual, and through your leader support, I want to I want to take this work. I want to learn as I go through that journey. I want to grow and develop versus, yeah, put that to the side. Just do these things the way they've always been done. That's a totally missed opportunity. And I love that you're bringing that up. So you want to be doing work that's worthy of story, that gets you excited. And how you do that, I think one of the challenges, but also the opportunities and where leadership is actually kind of fun, is there's no one size fits all, to your point. So yes, I think the goal that I set out to with Leadership Uncomplicated was look at the fundamental principles, right? What are those 5 things in those areas? Because when you can dispel the myths, and there's a lot of moving parts in leadership, and often things just get neglected, even to the point where you're neglecting. There's a part in the book where we talk, and we'll talk further about this in future episodes, I'm sure, the reflection, right? Taking your time out as a leader. The goal of the book was outline like a playbook, a guide that you can understand the puzzle pieces so that you can take away the mystery of it and you don't overlook anything, so that you can go with confidence and now focus on the development of your people and the mission and accomplishing the mission, because you're not dropping the ball and things you don't know what you don't know, right, as a leader. So really, really important to make sure to maintain that focus. And yes, you're right. I mean, one of the kind of funny things about models, years ago, I once did this exercise, and it was, if you think about like a simple model of like getting things done, like assess, plan, act, right? We used to do a lot of that at Cisco as well. And then you break down, people come up with their little buzzwords and their little models all the time, and they're great, but you can always map it to those things, right? Assess the situation, make a plan and a design, and then act, and then deploy, and then measure. So you don't want to get caught up in this is the one and only model, because you're right. You probably saw what I outlined, here in the book, and looked at VSEM and went, oh my gosh, right? And there's so many models out there. Again, go back to the principles. And I think the goal of the book was look at those principles. People will call them various things. Great. Whatever resonates with you, I think, is really important. And I would encourage you, as you explore the topic of leadership, whether it's the focus areas that I outline, or VSEM, or any other model out there, go with the one that resonates with you. They're all great. They're all practices that are trying to help employ the principles of great leadership and strategic alignment. They'll often start that way, right? And you'll hear many people who are coaching and helping leaders make sure there's clarity at the top. You got bottom up, top down, all that comes together. So yeah, there is no one size, this is the end all be all. They're more principally aligned, which is good. Go with the model that resonates with you. Again, I'll go back to, and again, I don't mean to plug the martial arts, because I'm obviously biased, and I think there's a lot of value add there, but it's not about learning one art or the other. I don't care. I don't get caught up in, oh, this is more effective than, no. Go with the art that resonates with you. That's where you're going to learn. That's where you're going to enjoy. If you're working with a model that's counter to what sits well with you and resonates with you, you're just going to drop it. It's not going to speak to you. Go with what does, and then you'll be able to go beyond just kind of the initial look to really explore. And then to your point earlier about folks working with you and I, I love working one-on-one with individuals, because it is a case-by-case basis. So I know you and I mean it when we say reach out to us, right? Let's talk through some of these things. What are some of the opportunities and challenges? Is not only go with a model that resonates with you, but align yourself to folks that are really here to support you, that they resonate with you. Someone might have a one-on-one with me or a one-on-one with you, and it just it fits better one way or the other. As long as we're working together with other people and we're really helping anybody sort of learn in their own way on their own terms, that's ultimately what we want to do, right?
Yeah.
That's what coaches are here for, is, and it isn't a one size fits all. And I like that part. I think life isn't a one size fits all. So we shouldn't approach it that way. So great point, Ken. I'm glad you brought
Yeah.
that up. Even though I have kind of in a way created a model, but again, it's designed around break it down to the fundamentals, come up with your own model based on even some of the material that I've presented out there. As long as it resonates with you and you understand all the parts and pieces that come with being a great leader, part of that is management. But that's going to be really important for you. And then you can move forward with confidence. Like, okay, I kind of get the big picture now. I kind of understand all these pieces. Some areas you'll gravitate towards easier than others. Like many of us, delivering results is something that's very, very easy for a lot of us to do. But it has to be looked upon within the framework of all these other things. But thank you for bringing it up. Going with a model that resonates. Don't get too caught up in those, but pay attention to them because the models are trying to put the pieces together so that you can best understand them.
Yeah. Well, and one point that resonated with me that you made is that at the end of the day, people they want to know that their work is impactful, right?
Right.
That they have an impact in what's going on. Um, and it's important to make sure that as they develop, these goals and this plan, that it aligns and connects, right? Their contributions align and connect. And it shows that, hey, I have impact in ultimately where we're headed. And I think that is a critical piece that I think often gets overlooked, right? As leaders, we sometimes create these objectives and don't clearly define how the individual's
Right.
contribution gets us there. And I think today, and I go back to generation because they do look at things differently than you and I did, or even the older generation of boomers do and did. So it's important to really, I think, get to that individual level of making sure that individuals understand how and what they do is impactful. Everybody talks about, I want a job where I feel like I'm contributing, that I matter.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because a lot of companies will say, we don't want you to just come in and have a job. We want you to have a career here. But then they don't support a culture that truly leans into that. They say that as if the bullet point is going to be attractive enough for people to stay. Not true. It's a great thing to say, but not all cultures really live up to that. You're right. And so one of the things that's very important to understand is getting to know your people. And you talk about different generations. I remember one time I was working on it was some sort of HR related project, and we were talking about generational approaches, and how we do that. And I remember I was putting together some bullet points around the younger generation, and it was funny because I literally said this, and I fully believe this. It's like you can say whatever you will about the older generations and the younger generations, but the younger generations, they're the future. It literally just said they're the future. So it falls on you to really understand, like, these are human beings. Times have changed, right? A lot of people don't just sit around anymore, wait for direction. They have a sense. It's how do you empower them and how do you connect them to the work that matters. So if I can, I'll share a quick story of something that's
Sure.
literally happened recently on a team. So I have a gentleman who works for me. Shout out to Kazi, who does really fundamentally impactful work on my team. I mean, really operational. He's kind of behind the scenes, operational work. It's so critical though, and sometimes in operational support roles, they're not always getting the limelight, but it's super critical work. But one of the things we started to explore as I got to know this person a little bit more is super talented, wants to learn. It could have been very easy for me to say, just stay there, do this stuff the way you've been doing it. It's great because it's important, but it's very manual work, right? It's not the sexiest stuff in the world. But instead, as I learned more about what motivates this individual and got to know them better, also the capabilities and the sort of energy and hunger to learn more, I'm like, well, wait a second. There's ways that we can do not only tie the work you do to the value and again work worthy of story, but then where's the opportunity to develop folks into something way more meaningful for them. And so long story short, what we did was we worked together to say, okay, rather than do this manual, daily, important work, let's shift your focus to designing, literally technical design work, into transforming into actionable intelligence and data and insights. So you're not doing the legwork, you're doing the design work for an automated solution that delivers actually really compelling insights. So the work is valuable, and then also level that up to new skills. And here's the funny thing, like I said, I could have said, keep doing what you're doing because you do amazing, and he does amazing work. Now he took that challenge, he has applied that knowledge, he has built brand new real-time data-driven dashboards for the entire department. He's learning new skills, he's applying himself differently, and it's still in the context of that same work. But that would have been a completely missed opportunity if someone would just looked at, this is what this individual does, this is their job, keep doing that. That's what we moved beyond, right? Tapping into what's really making folks excited to come to work every day, and there's untapped talent there, and that has completely shifted. And then, of course, the energy becomes, I'm now engaged in something, leveraging my knowledge to apply something different. So there's opportunities to do this. It's the age old. Don't treat people like, it's like the golden rule. It's the platinum rule. Treat people the way they want to be treated. It's important as a leader. This is why it's difficult, though. You have to take the time to get to know everything that's going on with your team, as well as your boss or supervisor, and really lean into that. There's an element of human behavior and psychology that's involved with leading because it's about people. I also think that's one of the reasons why a lot of folks in leadership roles shift right back to management, right? Because leadership it can be complicated, and there's lots of things going on and everything's different, and right when you figure out one way that works well with one person, it's not going to be applied to the next person, even though fundamentally you have to adhere to the same larger principles in the model. But that's the fun of it, right? Because if you really enjoy that, and you can really work to tap into that and begin to enjoy that, you start to unlock. When one of the things that I've noticed being a leader is human beings are capable of so much amazing work when they're properly aligned and motivated. And so management's about like managing within thresholds. Okay, the machine can operate low and high threshold. Human beings can operate and go way beyond that, right? That's our superpower. And so leadership can really be instrumental in getting to know your people, helping them see the value in the skills they bring, because not everybody even understands their own strengths, right? A strength being something you do well and energizes you. So in the case I just brought up, the work was being done well, but is it energizing, right? And we talked last time about the saying that I've heard my family for years: the reward for good work is more work. And so what happens is you can get caught up in, hey, you're doing a great job, and they are, and they're doing it manually, and that's great. And so you just keep fueling that. The reality is they're sort of quietly miserable, right? Because yes, it's good work, but that's not motivating. What will motivate them? Where's the opportunity? Where is the chance to help people begin to learn and grow? And so that shift of keep doing what you're doing, it's great, to what's important to your people and how does that match with where you're going? That's strategic alignment. That's where you have amazing teams. And what happens is you want to shift in your organization that you have amazing leaders and amazing teams by design, not by chance. Right now, a lot of work, it's like you have this great, it's sort of all the things just sort of by chance align. You want to move to a model where and it starts with leadership, in my opinion, where leaders are truly tapping into this. And that's where innovation and creativity and thinking differently and new is going to really inspire and energize folks, even in the domains of work that's just running the business, right? Not everything has to be innovative, but moving beyond the current state. And right now, I think a lot of people are hungry for that because we all recognize that with the advent of real like AI coming into the mix, you know, that's a real thing out there on the peripheral. Like those are the wolves at the door right now. And if we try to ignore that versus tap into our people, allowing them to be more human and tapping into what that means, I think it's a huge opportunity for leaders to start to focus on because the managerial deliverable stuff, you know, good, bad, ugly, worse, what have you, we don't know yet. You know, to be determined in terms of AI. AI will do a really great job with a lot of that stuff. Let's start to focus on what it means to lead and what it means to lead and where you're going and how you're going to get there. That all starts with strategic alignment.
Yeah, and I'm going to refer to some data points that you call out essentially reinforce why this is so important. Because when I read these, I was just, something kind of blow me away when I think about it. But if you don't mind, I'm going to read a couple
Sure.
and then get your sort of closing thoughts on this. But
Yeah.
the first is studies show that when teams are aligned, they experience a 21% increase in profitability and 41% less absenteeism. The next, 65% of executives believe strategic alignment is critical for achieving long-term success, but only a third of their organization excels in that area.
Yeah.
And finally, almost half of organizations, 48% of organizations, struggle with poor communication, which impedes strategic alignment.
Yeah.
So it's, I think about these things, incredible statistics about why it is so important. And so give me some final thoughts about your sense
Yeah.
when you came across this data and what your reactions were.
Yeah, I love it. And thank you for bringing that up. This is why I love our conversation so much because I'll boil all that down to I remember I used to always have this sort of question in the back of my mind. Everyone kind of knows and has heard the old saying, you know, people don't leave their companies, they leave their boss, right? So if that's true, and we know that it is, because we all know from personal experiences that that's the case, why are we not focusing on the evolution of the boss? Like it makes perfect sense. And you're right, you know, you have the statistics that outline that. And I go, look, if you don't believe, just scroll through LinkedIn. It's every day you scroll through, it's all there. I mean, it's right in front of us. I think the hard part is this is the difficult part, right? Being a leader is not about having the corner office, having a great title, earning a great salary, and telling people what to do. That's that's not what it's really about. It is about in service of others, right? And so um, the data is there, and if you need statistics, again, I like that what you did there with reading those off because that goes back to one of the key traits of a great leader, being strategic, and one of those skills is about being data driven. So arm yourself with the data, right? As a good human being, you're going to have sort of an initial intuition with what's right, but arm yourself with the data that backs that up. So that's one of the reasons why I include a lot of the data and insights within the book, is so that you have a starting point to go, okay, we're not just doing this because we want to, you know, have better leaders. There's a real financial impact here. And I think that's one of the final thoughts that I'll leave you with is we're not just doing this because it's fun and it's interesting and it's good to have great leaders just because. This absolutely, it's one of the big reasons it's one of the things that really perplexes me is the bottom line is so dramatically impacted by your leadership. Why in the I have no in fact, it's interesting because it's one of the reasons why I went into the world of human resources, was to focus within that area where human resources, they are the people, where their core competency is people. And so it makes sense. So it is baffling sometimes why organizations you know, don't put more and more energy into making sure that that you're adhering to these principles of leadership, because wonderful things happen. In fact, one of the things that's very interesting to me, if I think about even my current role being in sort of the HR technology and the talent development space, the reality is if you have a great leader and they're doing all of the things that great leaders should be doing, inspiring their teams, aligning to the value work, etc., you actually don't need talent development. You don't need that. And I'm not trying to say like you don't need like my job. That would be career limiting for me, of course. But that's the reality. The hard part though is the reason why you have it is this is a hard thing to do a lot of times, even for experienced folks. Why? Because everything changes all the time, right? Again, going back to if everything's the same, it's management, but things are always changing. Internal to the business, external in the market, people coming and going, you're changing everything. How you get comfortable with being uncomfortable around all of those things, I think, is really key. And then the other thing I'll just kind of leave you with as a final thought that I think is really important for leaders is whether it's a previous leader or maybe even think of it as like a lot of times I'll go back to like teachers because we've all been in academia, right? Everyone knows what it's like to have that really amazing teacher, and then also that like really like challenged teacher. And even with the teachers that we resonate with that were really inspiring, they weren't easy, right? That's the interesting thing. It's often very challenging, but they did that in a way that was just so. It was almost really fun to be uncomfortable and to learn the new whatever. Same thing with leaders. I want to leave folks with this idea of just think about in your personal experience what that what was it like that one leader that you had? What were they like? What did they do? How did they make you feel? And spend some time thinking about that in your own way, in your own world on how you can apply and create that same level of respect and vulnerability and trust and energy with your team. And remember, you're human beings. And the more human that you are, right, the more vulnerable you are, the more open you are. Again, sometimes in the world of security, we can't always be very transparent about every single thing. I recognize that. But we can be more transparent about many things that we typically aren't because it's uncomfortable. But you have to role model that behavior as a leader. Open up. A good example that I'll share with you, Kim, because you know this, we go way back, is and I mentioned this at the top of the call, when my wife started to struggle with MS, oftentimes I was like, I'm not talking about that, right? That's hard to do because if you have a situation like that, your personal life, your professional life, although you'll hear people talk about they're not muted. This is your life. It's all inclusive. It's all part of who you are. So it's important to be vulnerable. Yep, I have this, and my wife is a priority to me, and I 100% support her, and it's a non-negotiable. So rather than try to pretend it doesn't exist, address it. And I think that's another thing that a lot of great leaders will do is if the project status button turns red, it's red. Don't try to sugarcoat it and make excuses. It's red. Now deal with it and move on. Turning it into an opportunity. It's like the old, never let a crisis go to waste. We saw a lot of that during the pandemic, right? So again, coming back, think about those great leaders that you've had. What did they do? How did they treat you? How do they treat others? Very important.
Great, great. Well, hey, Brian, I really enjoyed our session today, going deep into strategic alignment. Um, I appreciate you going deep into the book and agreeing to do this series, really, which is I think, super beneficial in terms of what needs to happen, specifically in the safety and security industry, with having some very specific type of training for leaders, which really doesn't exist today. So, again, this content, I'm looking forward for our next session. We'll talk about delivering results, I
Yep.
think, as we look
Okay.
towards the next segment. But I really appreciate your time today and joining me. Thank you.
You bet. Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.